Thank God my neighbor Sandy's home. Who else would I go to Costco with to check out all the new things they got? Like this knot pillow, and I'm telling you, it's not comfortable.
His videos are full of smiles, joy, and positivity.
I'm one of those people who likes to try everything out before I buy it.
But what many don't know, the heartbreak of his
So
childhood.
supportive. They laugh at my stupid jokes and put up with my crazy antics. Anyways, like I was saying,
being a child, that the only thing that I ever wanted was to be loved. Because I didn't feel like I was. I wanted to be at home with my sisters who got to live at home, but I couldn't. I wanted what they had. I wanted to be there on Christmas morning. I wanted someone to celebrate my birthday with me. Here we are, the house I grew up in as a child.
His life wasn't easy. His parents divorced when he was 3. He was struggling with who he was, and it all spiraled over the years.
Obviously, with my parents being divorced and me being somebody who didn't know who they identified as, and being in a tug of war between my parents, I had a lot of behavioral issues, and they started very early. My mother used to think and say, you know, I thought that you were going to grow up to be a serial murderer. As a child, at a very young age, there was a time that I was on the sidewalk outside of whatever apartment complex that we lived in, and a pregnant woman walked by me, and I had a popsicle stick that I had sharpened on the sidewalk, and I looked up at her and said, "I'm going to carve your baby out." And so things, you know, continued for me as a child with behavioral issues of getting into trouble with the law and not attending school and just having a really hard time, obviously, you know, with the life that I knew at that time. With my mother being the alcoholic that she was, living on welfare, to my father also being abusive. There were times that I can remember getting in trouble and being sent to my room and having to wait for my father to get home. That it was either the belt that had the metal balls that went across it, or it was a very large, hollow piece of rubber tubing that I would feel the wrath of.
He says the most traumatic times in his childhood came in middle school.
I do remember a time that he dragged me by my hair outside of the house into the driveway and threw me up against the garage door with his hands around my neck. And it was actually the very first time that I ever fought back, ripping his glasses off of his face, and the neighborhood took notice of what was going on at this time too. And
I can't imagine.
It's really hard to imagine unless you were somebody who lived through that. And so, you know, I was not the child that could be left alone, who would start fires, who would steal from the local stores, who, you know, would figure out that there were a couple instances that had taken place where, you know, I had friends that had discovered at the local laundromat that, you know, if you got a stick and put some chewed up bubble gum on it and you stuck it up a hole, it would stick onto the dollar bills in the quarter dispensing machine. And we sat there for hours until our pockets were bulging. Ditching school one time, going to an arcade, saw a shipping container that had been turned into an office at a local gas station with the doors open, and walked up inside to find bank bags and coffee cans filled with money and took it. And my mother was already living on welfare, and with my behavioral issues, she always had the fear that I was going to do something that was going to get her evicted from where she was living. So all of these things compiled on top of each other finally put my parents in a place where they just didn't know what to do anymore, and had petitioned the courts in the state of California to take custody of me because they didn't know what to do.
He says at that point, his parents had tried everything they could think of: grandma, hospitalization, and more.
Then it ultimately ended up in front of the courts because they had no other alternatives. I mean, I think that they had exhausted every viable alternative that they could think of that was at their means of dispose before sitting in front of a judge. And I began a life in the juvenile system for the state of California.
How old were you?
12.
So you're sitting in the courtroom. Did you know this was going to happen? Did they talk to you about it ahead of time, or were you just surprised that day?
I don't think at 12 years old you can comprehend what that looks like, regardless of explanation. Did I know that that was the day I was going to be removed from my family and I wasn't going back home? I wasn't going back to the psych unit at the hospital where I had finally maybe found a safe space? No, I didn't know that. And so I found myself in handcuffs and taken to Sylmar Juvenile Hall. And, you know, having to wear the clothes that they put you in, and having a cell that I had to live in. And this very criminal-like structure that was now my life in custody. I was probably there for a month as my parents worked with the state of California on what the best avenue was for me in being placed somewhere outside of juvenile hall. I haven't been back to this town in 30 years. My childhood was pretty traumatic.
He spent the next few years bouncing from place to place. He returned to those same places in 2021. Most of them turned into something else now. He went to a boys' home, then back to Sylmar, and then a children's village, until finally he went somewhere he felt he belonged: GLASS, Gay and Lesbian Adolescent Social Services.
And I was now living among other teenagers that identified the same as I did.
Was that life-changing?
Absolutely life-changing. Yeah, absolutely life-changing, because now I had friends. Now I was living among people that were no longer going to make fun of me every day. I was no longer living with people that were going to place judgment on me.
I mean, so you bounce around from your mom to your dad to your grandma, then you bounce around to all these other places. There's no stability.
None whatsoever. And that has been one of the things growing up as a young adult into a seasoned adult that I am now, that I have always probably had the most sense of insecurity around is my sense of security and stability in life and a place that I can call my own, a dog that belongs to me. And I'm in that place now, but that was probably the biggest struggle as I was growing up as a young adult, is not ever having that sense of security as a child that had the biggest impact on me as an adult, and that always became my number one priority, is establishing a sense of security.
Because it sounds like at any moment you could be moved to the next place.
Exactly, yeah.
How do you live like that as a kid?
When you don't have an option to live any other way, you're forced.
At 17 and a half, his family finally said he could come back home. He dropped out of high school, moved back in with his mom, and started doing drugs. She kicked him out, and that meant more moves. He eventually went to rehab and has been sober for about 18 years now. As an adult, he became a CNA and worked his way up to nursing home administrator before quitting his job and using his platform on TikTok to make a living.
It only took me about an hour, and after connecting everything to the app,
Now, at age 51, he credits years of therapy for where he is today.
The entire family is going to be traumatized in one way or another. It's not an easy decision, and I know this because I'm in a place of forgiving, and accepting what's happened in my life. So I know at the moment it's never an easy decision for the parents to get to this point where they have to consider giving up the rights to their child. And then the other family members that are involved seeing what's taking place, knowing that, well, crap, is this going to happen to me too? I look back and I've already accepted and forgave my parents for doing the best that they knew how to do in the circumstances that they were presented with in the lives that they were living. And I have no resentment. I've had lots of conversations both with my father before he died and my mother, who passed about 4 years ago. And when I look back on things now, it sounds absolutely traumatic, and it was traumatic living through that. But surviving that and being on the surviving end of it, that doesn't let the traumas of my childhood create resentment that I live and walk with every single day, has been a very forgiving place. And my mother, for many, many years, always harbored resentment for the way that we were raised. Not only myself, but my sisters as well. And always beat herself up for being the mother that she was. And so a lot of those conversations came when my mother would open the conversation of apologizing for being the mother that she was, where I had to reinforce that I don't harbor resentment for that. It's time to forgive yourself. Had I not been raised the way that I was, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. And I absolutely 100% believe that. I would be somebody completely different. The trauma that I lived through is what shaped me into the person that I am today.
Our first subscriber tree of the year is officially complete. I've also completed our second one.